Hello, how are you? Passing very hard time and going through your studies. Well, let's study some topics on congenital heart disease. I am also recovering from my fractured clavicle and hope to do so and reach the college within a fortnight or so. Let's see now. Coming to your topic on today, what I planned is giving you three or four more topics on cardiovascular system. One should be on your cyanotic heart disease, that is Fallot's tetralogy, which is an ideal congenital cyanotic heart disease for you, and another one would be on congestive heart failure and similar topics. This topic I have chosen because you'll have a certain glimpse of your clinical acumen and clinical material also. That means it will include about your implications of second heart sound and other things, and including an idea on your Nada's criteria, how to diagnose congenital heart disease. We had previously discussed about the physiological classification of congenital heart disease, like your left to right shunt, right to left shunt, then other things, everyone in detail in the physiology. Then now today is the approach to congenital heart disease. So here in this presentation, we will discuss on common clues that will help in the diagnosis of congenital heart disease, Nada's criteria for the diagnosis of congenital heart disease, which is a gold standard, and diagnostic implication of the second heart sound. Now, the common clinical clues that help in the diagnosis of congenital heart disease include cyanosis, difficulty in feeding and poor growth, difficulty in breathing, frequent respiratory infections, specific syndromes. So, these are the few topics that will be discussed here within the purview of common clinical clues that help in the diagnosis of congenital heart disease. Okay? So first is the cyanosis. Cyanosis is one of the symptoms that is easily missed by the parents. Usually they feel that it is the normal color, and it is easily picked up, more easily I should say, by the parents when it is episodic. That when the child is otherwise less cyanosed or slightly pinkish, and when the child becomes blue during crying, because during crying child is looked after more intently by the parents. Otherwise they seldom report cyanosis unless it is very severe, which implies a saturation to parents may complain of difficulty in feeding in children with congenital heart disease. Usually, it's a feature of congestive heart failure resulting from congenital heart disease. Usually, you get history of either slow feeding or small volume feeding, and that time it becomes a frequent feeders, tiring easily following feeds, and needs prior rest during feed. There is also history of excessive forehead or occipital sweating, which is an evidence of catecholamine secretion. Sometimes there is history of feeding difficulty that is not found, but when you go for the growth chart or you gradually follow the child up, you follow that the child is not growing well. So if you put the weight on the growth chart, you show or find that the reveal recent decline in the growth rate. Characteristically, growth failure affects weight more than height. You know very well why? Because it is a case of acute malnutrition, isn't it? It's not a chronic one. So now when you consider breathing difficulty, we think of two things. One is the respiratory rate, and second one is the excessive use of accessory. That is called difficulty or labored breathing. So tachypnea or increase in rate is a characteristic feature of heart failure more of newborn. It also affects older children but to a lesser extent. And respiratory rate parameter which has been set for this is that up to 1 month, if it is more than 60 per minute, it is called tachypnea, whereas between 2 to 12 months, that is the infant age, it is up to 50, and whenever it is more than 40 after the infantile age, I mean in children up to 5 years, it is called tachypneic. So in infants, subcostal intercostal retractions together with flaring of nostrils are frequently associated with tachypnea. That means labored breathing and tachypnea coexist in infants. Another important feature of congenital heart disease is frequent association with respiratory infections. Respiratory infections are more frequent and they are usually more severe, and sometimes they are difficult to treat in small children. Also, it is more frequent with large left to right sons than with smaller sons, and it is not a specific feature. That means there may be other causes of recurrent respiratory tract infection as well. But those conditions which are associated with pulmonary congestion and excessive flow through the lung, it leads to more frequent respiratory. Some specific syndromes or chromosomal anomalies also, they are associated with congenital heart disease. As we have discussed in previous classes also, that chromosomal anomalies are associated with congenital heart disease. I have picked up only few very common that would be useful for you, like trisomy 21 is the commonest anomaly associated with congenital heart disease, and commonest type of congenital heart disease associated with this condition is endocardial cushion defect. Trisomy 13 and 18 likewise, they are associated more commonly with ventricular septal defect or patent ductus arteriosus. Turner syndrome 45XO is associated with bicuspid aortic valve and coarctation of aorta. Noonan's is associated with male pulmonary stenosis. Dijot syndrome is associated with interrupted aortic arch, and like there are many, I have only put forward few things. After discussing these things, so we have got an idea of how children present with congenital heart disease, and now we'll go Nadasis criteria, or the criteria that is used for diagnosis of congenital heart disease. Now, assessment or presence of heart disease can be done by using Nadasis criteria. Well, congenital heart disease is indicated by presence of one major and two minor criteria, and these criteria are of limited use for newborns where clinical signs are subtle, like a child may present with congenital heart disease in infant or newborn age, maybe only tachypnea may be the only feature, or child is not growing well, child is frequent feeder, crying incessantly, may be the only clinical sign of hypoxemia resulting from congenital heart disease in small children. And you know about your Jones criteria, which are used for diagnosis of rheumatic fever, that we will be discussing in following classes. So here is the one major and two minor criteria are used for diagnosis of congenital heart disease is Nadasis criteria, and we need to know what are these criteria actually mean. Let us go for the next slide. And here comes Nadasis criteria for clinical diagnosis of congenital heart disease. Remember, this is a clinical diagnostic clues. Major criteria include systolic murmur of grade 3 or more, diastolic murmur, cyanosis, and congestive cardiac failure. Minor criteria include all abnormals systolic murmur grade 1 or 2, and then all abnormals, abnormal second heart sound, abnormal ECG, and abnormal blood pressure. These constitute Nadas' criteria, and remember, this is a clinical diagnosis. We don't use echocardiography and others here for the diagnosis of congenital heart disease. This is for clinical diagnosis only. Okay. In the ensuing next few slides, will let us know how these murmurs are graded, then how you differentiate between cyanosis, central or peripheral cyanosis. What is the implication of second heart sound? What is the normal range of blood pressure in small infant and children? That will be discussed in next few slides. Before going for assessment of murmurs, we should know how the murmur is interpreted by analysis of many factors, and that includes intensity. We are talking about grade 3. What do you mean by grade? How it is measured, like this. So main factors that are used for interpreting or analyzing murmur are where the area of maximum intensity or localization of the murmur. Then timing in the cardiac cycle, whether it is systolic, diastolic or systolo-diastolic, and what is the exact timing within the systole, if it is in the early systole, mid systole or late systole. That too applies for diastole also. How intensity affects the diagnosis of congenital heart disease. And what do you mean by radiation? Here sometimes teachers ask you about radiation and your propagation, that is sometimes called selective propagation. When the intensity of the sound goes to any specified direction more prominently than in other places, it is called radiation or selective propagation. Otherwise, some teachers call it's a conduction. So, or many times they do not differentiate. So, if they differentiate, the differentiation between radiation and conduction is this. In conduction, the intensity is same all throughout. In radiation, intensity is prominent or maximum in a selective direction. That's all. Now, how it is related to the respiration? That means whether or when the murmur is more intense in inspiration, expiration, or both inspiration and expiration, and how posture and other things affect the intensity of the murmur and your clinical diagnosis. Like if a murmur which has involved the left side of the heart, so it is more likely to be more prominent when the patient in the left lateral position. Base of the heart, it is in the upper part of the chest anatomically. So if you stoop forward in sitting position, what will happen? Base will come in close proximity to the chest. So basal murmurs are more prominent when you sit and stoop forward, that is incline forwards. So these are the things will be discussed. In this slide, we'll discuss how area of maximum intensity of the murmur affect in the clinical diagnosis of congenital heart disease. Now, as you know, in children, the apex or mitral area is in the left fifth intercostal space, and in the second intercostal space we get on the right side the aortic area, and on the left side is the pulmonary area, and left third intercostal space in the parasternal region, it is called neo-aortic area, where aortic murmur or rather the ventricular outlet murmurs become more prominent, and left fourth intercostal space where at the level of ventricular septum, so ventricular septal and other similar murmurs are more prominent there, and apical or ventricular murmurs are more prominent on the mitral area or left fifth intercostal space. So in the apex we get systolic murmurs of mitral regurgitation and mitral valve prolapse more prominently, whereas in the diastole, mitral stenosis is more prominent there. In the left lower sternal border, where at the level of ventricular septum I told, where in the systole obviously VSD is the commonest murmur that we can find out there. Tricuspid regurgitation may also be found sometimes in the diastole in the atrial septal defect murmur, where usually there is functional tricuspid stenosis, and in cases of pathological tricuspid stenosis as well, we get these murmurs in the left lower sternal border. In the left upper sternal border, as I said, it's called the neo-aortic area by some people, some clinicians. In the diastole, aortic and pulmonary regurgitation murmurs are more prominently heard in the neo-aortic area. In the systolic, among the systolic murmurs, hypertrophic cardiomyopathy and pulmonary flow murmurs are more prominent there. In the pulmonary area or left second intercostal space, obviously murmurs related to this pulmonary valve are more prominent, like those in the systole of pulmonary stenosis or functional pulmonary stenosis murmur in atrial septal defect because of larger left to right pre-tricuspid shunts, and continuous flow murmurs of PDA are also more prominent there, and venous hum you can find among the flow murmurs or innocent murmurs. In the aortic area on the right second intercostal space, in the systole obviously aortic stenotic murmurs are more prominent. Carotid bruit sometimes are heard. Murmur component in the arterial segment is called bruit, and continuous flow murmur you can find that of venous hum. So these are the intensity maximum and localization effect of the different murmurs on different areas of the chest. Next. After localization, we should consider on the timing of the cardiac cycle. That means first thing whether it is systolic or diastolic, and second one is the if it is systolic, what is the exact timing in systole where the murmur is most prominent, which gives clue to the diagnosis. As we all know by now that systolic murmur grade 3 or more usually indicates organic heart disease. We'll go to the gradation of murmur just in next few slides. That is there. Now in the timing of the cardiac cycle in the systole, ejection systolic murmurs. What are the ejection systolic murmurs? Those murmurs which originate at the left or right ventricular ejection, due to ejection, that means at the output level, that means from the left ventricle or right ventricle to the great arteries, that means pulmonary aortic valve or below down in the great aorta. So there it is usually crescendo, it is called crescendo decrescendo murmur or diamond shaped murmur. That is, it starts after the first heart sound with a clear gap and ends before the second heart sound with a clear gap, and initially intensity gradually picking up and then going down, then fades off. So that's why it is called diamond murmur. And ejection systolic murmur is found in aortic stenosis, pulmonary stenosis and coarctation of aorta. Pansystolic, as you know, pansystolic means throughout the systole. It starts with the first heart sound and ends with the second heart sound, and it is present throughout conditions of ventricular septal defect, mitral and tricuspid regurgitation, where there is leak during the systole. So that is called left ventricle and right ventricle both are trying to eject blood forwards, and there is backward leak either at the septal level, that is the ventricular septum, or at the tricuspid valve level or mitral valve level. Late systolic murmur sometimes found in mitral valve prolapse, and mitral valve prolapse, this mitral valve is slightly elongated, long, and it is defective in functioning, that leads to late systolic ejection. Continuous murmur when there is typically it is found in patent ductus arteriosus. It starts after first heart sound, then gradually picks up. Peak is almost near the second heart sound. Then second heart sound is submerged into the murmur, and it goes somewhat in the diastole, almost in the middle of the diastole. So that's why it is called continuous murmur. How to differentiate between continuous murmur and systolo-diastolic? That means both in systole and diastole, as found in heart disease of different conditions. So, in systolo-diastolic murmur, second heart sound is clearly audible, whereas in PDA, second heart sound is submerged. That's how we differentiate between the two. Among the diastolic murmur, age-old teaching of mid-diastolic rumbling murmur of mitral stenosis. It starts with the second heart sound following ejection click, as when going down in the lower picture, then gradually fades off, and again it picks up with a pre-systolic accentuation due to atrial contraction. So this is found in the apex. An early diastolic murmur of aortic and pulmonary regurgitation, where during initial period of diastole, so there is increased pressure gradient, so and there is leaking of the blood from the great arteries into the left and right ventricle, leading to regurgitation, and this murmur is found. Now finally, grades of murmur. Now, different teachers put it differently. I have put it in a very simple way so that it can be very easy for you to remember also. So, there are 6 grades of murmur. Grade 1 is barely audible. You compare with the heart sound. It is always softer than the heart sound. That is a grade 1. When it is equal to the heart sound, it is grade 2. Grade 3 is more than the heart sound or louder than the heart sound, but there is no thrill on palpation. And grade 4, it is a loud murmur, louder than the heart sounds, as well as you get the thrill. That is a grade 4. And grade 5, when you are just taking the stato off, it is loosely on the chest wall, and still you very easily can auscultate, very easily can listen to the sound. And grade 6, even you put the stato off the chest wall, still you can hear it very clearly. That's a grade 6. That's the loudest of the murmurs. Now you can easily understand. So grade 3 or more is pathological. That means intensity of the murmur is louder than the heart sounds. As we were discussing the difference between conduction and radiation, from this picture, I have selected this one, you see. So you follow the direction of blood flow. From the aortic orifice, blood flows towards the great aorta, and that goes upwards and towards the left. So in aortic stenosis murmur, there will be selective propagation or radiation towards the carotid. Similarly, in ventricular septal defect, flows from left to right and slightly upwards in the left fourth intercostal space. So the direction of flow would be towards the right shoulder. In mitral regurgitation, again, since it goes from left ventricle to the left atrium and goes slightly backwards, so flow would be towards the axilla. So these are and ventricular septal defect, another example. It goes from left to right horizontally, so it is towards the right. So that's how we different times auscultate and try to find out the radiation of the murmur and to form an idea what could be the underlying cause of the murmur. When you compare relationship with respiration, you just follow the hemodynamics. During inspiration, what happens? Interpleural pressure is negative, so more blood flows into the right atrium, right side of the heart. and right side of the heart gets slightly more blood than the left side. So right-sided murmurs accentuate during inspiration. This is almost a gold standard rule. Whereas left-sided murmurs accentuate the reverse during expiration. Posture, I already have discussed that murmurs in the mitral stenosis are best heard in the left lateral position because of obvious reasons, and murmurs of the base of the heart, that means aortic and pulmonary area, are better heard when we stoop forwards. That means base of the heart comes closer to the chest wall and the murmur becomes more intense. This is very important. Actually, this is one of the most important areas to differentiate between innocent murmur and pathological murmur. In your clinical practice, always you have to find out, and you have to try to find out, is it pathological or is it innocent? If it is innocent, there is no need for going for investigation unless there is parental anxiety or you are in dilemma. Otherwise, in only pathological one needs investigation, and it's very difficult, to differentiate clinically between innocent and pathological murmurs. But we should know four major types of innocent murmurs, and the criteria for innocence are again four. So that means you follow the rule of four. The first and most gold standard rule is that child would be asymptomatic from the cardiovascular perspective. Parents will complain of any murmur or any sound, or most commonly what happens, sometimes they go to visit the clinician for some other reason and they get the information that child is having murmur and needs investigation and come to you. This sir, the child is having murmur as told by this physician, please do something. Second is the cardiac examination. When you go for cardiac examination of that child and you find nothing else other than the murmur itself, that means second heart sound is normal, first heart sound is normal. There is no clinical evidence as we are discussing like feeding problem, other things, respiratory rate, blood pressure, everything is normal. Child is playing normally but having the murmur only. Now, diastolic murmurs, as you know, are always pathological as we have learned from the Nadas' criteria. So, it is heard only during systole, except the venous hum, which is heard both systole and the diastole. And so, any venous hum murmur is heard both in systole and diastole. And you remember, the venous hum is the only murmur which is innocent but heard during diastole also. And intensity, as you talked of, it would always be less than 3 by 6. That is grade 1 or 2 by 6. There would be less than the intensity of the heart sound. If you compare intensity of the murmur with the heart sound, intensity of the murmur would be less than the heart sound. These are the few gold standard rules to clinically differentiate between a pathological and an innocent murmurs. Now localization also. Carotid bruit is found on the carotids, so it is supraclavicular. Then venous hum, it is in the aortic and pulmonary area, as you see in the image. Then pulmonary ejection murmur you found in the left, third and fourth intercostal space, and vibratory stills murmur is found at the apex. So these are the four major grades of innocent murmurs. This is very important. In our previous class, I told you about types of central cyanosis, peripheral cyanosis, mixed cyanosis and enterogenous cyanosis. Here, we will try to differentiate between central and peripheral cyanosis only because we are considering the congenital heart disease diagnosis. You should know the basic why central and peripheral cyanosis develop. Central cyanosis develops due to defect in the central oxygenation apparatus, which is heart or lung. So any condition which leads to disease and significant disease of the heart and lung will lead to central cyanosis. So there will be less oxygen supply into the blood from the very oxygenation apparatus and the whole body will be cyanosed. So both skin and mucosa will be blue. Whereas in peripheral cyanosis, central oxygenation apparatus is normal. So blood leaving the heart, that is the left ventricle, into the ejecting into the aorta, that their SaO2 or partial saturation of oxygen is normal. But here what happens, there is disbalance between demand and supply, and there is increased oxygen extraction as compared to the supply into the peripheral tissues, leading to cyanosis. So here what happens, skin becomes blue, whereas mucosa, because their difference of temperature of about 0.5 to 1 degree centigrade, it is warmer. So blood supply is slightly more in the mucosa as compared to the skin in normal times. So it remains pink. As the central oxygenation is normal in peripheral cyanosis and whole body is not cyanosed, so in peripheral cyanosis, clubbing is absent, and clubbing is not a feature of peripheral cyanosis, it is more a feature of central cyanosis. As the mucosa is slightly warmer than the skin, so rewarming leads to no effect on central cyanosis, and rewarming leads to disappearance of cyanosis in peripheral cyanosis. Oxygen inhalation again leads to no change, as central oxygenation is normal in peripheral cyanosis. So giving more oxygenation do not lead to increased oxygen saturation. Whereas in central cyanosis, as tissue oxygenation, blood oxygenation is less as compared to normalcy, so there may be slight improvement of cyanosis in central group when oxygen is given, and SaO2 would be less than 85% in central cyanosis as compared to peripheral cyanosis, where it will be normal when blood is leaving the heart. And this is the last major criteria in Nadas's classification of congenital heart disease diagnosis, and that is congestive heart failure. Presence of congestive heart failure indicates heart disease. There are exceptions, You need to know this, because neonates and infants, this is the group where, in spite of having a normal heart, patient may show congestive heart failure. Conditions associated like anemia, hypoglycemia, then hypoxemia, they may lead to congestive heart failure even though there is no heart disease in infants and newborns. So that we need to remember. In the minor criteria group, you need to know about them as well as why they are minor. That is also important, because ECG is used to determine in children mean QRS axis, atrial hypertrophy, right or left, or ventricular hypertrophy, right or left. Then criteria of this ventricular hypertrophy is based on voltage criteria, and it is not diagnostic for the presence of heart disease. Voltage for QRS complexes can be affected by many factors. That is an important issue, because changes in blood viscosity will lead to change in voltage criteria. Electrolyte imbalance, very important issue, you can easily understand. Thickness of the chest wall. Thicker the chest wall, lesser would be the voltage. Position of the electrodes on the chest wall is also important. So these variability factors has put ECG in the back seat, and it has been put into the relegated to the minor criteria group. Again, in the X-ray, again for the same reason, why abnormal X-ray is a minor criteria? Because it is a clear evidence and you can see directly. Still it is minor, because changes in during respiration leads to change in child's chest diameter to a significant extent. So what is expiratory? In expiratory film, sometimes a normal heart looks like a case of cardiomegaly because the chest diameter is less. Whereas when you need to diagnose cardiomegaly in a better way, you need a good inspiratory film. And children are usually not cooperative, and that's why it is difficult to get a good inspiratory film. That's why it is put in the minor criteria group. Again, another factor is the thymus. Thymic shadow is very huge in children less than 2 years and mimics cardiomegaly many times, and hence giving a it's relegated to the minor criteria group. I'll show you in the next slide as a few classical radiological signs of congenital heart disease. Now see here, I am showing you three X-ray pictures, and one either X-rays are put like this. One is the real X-ray, and second one is the we have given some diagrams to correlate with the sign. So this is called, first one is the egg on side. As you can see, the vertical diameter of the cardiac shadow is less as compared to transverse diameter, and in the next side X-ray picture on the side, the egg has been shown and as a comparative one. This is a typical picture egg on side called is the transposition of great vessels. Next one is the Snowben sign or figure of 8 sign. That is a classical cardiac sign of total anomalous pulmonary venous connection, where there is a kink in the middle. Now, the most talked about congenital heart disease in the cyanotic group is tetralogy of Fallot, where due to right ventricular hypertrophy, it is called upturned boot or Cohen-Sabot. So the boot has been shown in the as a comparative one. You can see the cardiophrenic angle that is very acute, and there is loss of shadow of the pulmonary bay, and right ventricular hypertrophy led to pushing of the heart that gives the classical Cohen-Sabot appearance in tetralogy of Fallot. Just few words about abnormal blood pressure. Blood pressure is difficult to obtain accurately in small children, and that's why the clinical guideline is to measure blood pressure regularly in children above 3 years of age. And here also, due to difference in length of the arm, the blood pressure cuff size vary. An appropriate size cuff has to be used. One clinical dictum you should remember that when the appropriate sized cuff is not available, never go for undersized cuff. Always go for oversized cuff, because undersized cuff leads to higher blood pressure values, and that gives the erratic result, and you should not do that. But the classical size width, for your remembrance, I can put a mnemonic like thing: 2, 3, 4, 5 inch. You remember like this: 2, 3, 4, 5 newborn, infant, child and adult. Newborn, infant, child and adult, and 2, 3, 4, 5 for newborn 2 inch, infant 3 inch, 4 inch for child and 5 inch for adult. This is very easy to remember. Going for measurement values, you should remember in children, usual gap between the systolic and diastolic is around 30 millimeter of mercury. For newborn, again I give you clue of some mnemonic. Newborn 9. So newborn 9, so it is 90. Upper limit of systolic blood pressure is 90 millimeter of mercury. 1 year is 100. 1 year is 100. Newborn 90, 1 year 100. That's very easy to remember. From then onwards, from 2 year onwards, go on adding 2 millimeter of mercury per year. So till 11 years, it comes to 120 millimeter of mercury. Till 11 years, it comes to 120 millimeter of mercury. Now again, going by the diastolic, I told you the difference is 30 millimeter. So from 90, it is the in diastolic side, it is less than 60. For 1 year, it is less than 70. Then again 2 millimeter every year till 90 millimeter is reached. Till 90 millimeter is reached. This is a very useful clinical simple mnemonic, so that you can practice this in your clinic as well as whenever on the go you can remember, and don't need to go for the your percentile graphs, which are the more or which are the more accurate measurement of abnormal blood pressure. I am going to that one in the next one, how to define abnormal blood. Here comes those definitions. Hypertension, it is defined as systolic blood pressure and or diastolic blood pressure. It is not only systolic, remember. More than 95th percentile for age, sex and height. Age, sex and height, very important, on at least 3 occasions. So more than 95th percentile, systolic and diastolic, age, sex and height, more than 3 occasions. This is the definition of hypertension. Now, what we have told about the 90, 100, these things, these are the 90th centile figures. These are 90th centile figures. Elevated systolic blood pressure or elevated blood pressure is talked about when it is more than 90th centile, that is between 90th and 95th centile. And stage 1 and stage 2 hypertension. Stage 1 is, some people call it 95th centile plus 12 millimeter, and some people call it between 95th to 99th centile, and whenever it is above 99th centile or 95th centile plus 12 millimeter value, it is called stage 2 hypertension in children. Elevated blood pressure with 120 by 80 millimeter of mercury and 129 and less than 80 millimeter is talked about as elevated blood pressure, and hypertension is defined as more than 130 by 80 millimeter mercury in adolescents. Coming to the last but very important part of the diagnosis of congenital heart disease is the diagnostic implication of the second heart sound. Remember, this is a very important clue, and many of these things you can find out in your clinical practice. Again, why second heart sound has been included into the minor criteria when I told that it is very important? So second heart sound has been included into the minor criteria only because auscultation of an individual is a subjective finding and it varies from person to person. Now let us try to explore the basic physiology of the heart sounds. Heart sounds are produced due to, as you know, closure of the valves. Either atrioventricular valves producing first heart sound and semilunar valves producing second heart sounds. So they may occur early, or they may take time, that means becomes delayed, or they may be more accentuated in intensity, or they may be softer, that means less intensity. Now how this happens? It depends on mainly 3 factors. One is the pliability of the valve cusp. If the valve cusps are fixed and rigid like stenotic valves, so they will produce less sound. Closure would be slower and produce lesser sounds. And second one is the distance between the valve cusps at the end of the ventricular systole. More the openness of the valve cusp, that is the more the pressure gradient between the two, that will lead to more forceful closure of the valve cusps and more the intense is the sound. So these are the factors that affect the intensity of the heart sound. And now is the timing, whether it is delayed or early. You know, passing through or forcing through a very jam gate will take much more time. So if there is more force at the opening, at the pulmonary or systemic level, I mean systemic hypertension or pulmonary hypertension, so it will take more time to eject blood. Similar is the case of narrowed opening of aortic stenosis and pulmonary stenosis, it will take more time for the blood to eject. So they will be delayed in the time. Heart closure would also be delayed. Now, if there is a second avenue, say for ventricular septal defect or tricuspid regurgitation or mitral regurgitation, these are the alternate avenues of blood ejection. Again, so these alternate avenues will lead to early closure of the valves, and there will be early valve closure and valve sound. So coming back to the second heart sound, normal second heart sound means it has to fulfill the three criteria. One is that it has to have two components, A2 and P2, and that is when the aortic component and pulmonary component. Second is during quiet breathing, you know what happens during inspiration. There is more blood coming to the right side of the heart. So pulmonary ejection would be delayed. So A2P2 split would be more during inspiration as compared to a almost single heart sound during expiration when the pulmonary components comes earlier, as I have shown in the diagram also. A2 is louder because first heart, this aortic component closes against the aortic pressure, that is the higher than the pulmonary pressure, except for the infants where pulmonary hypertension is there during initial 3 to 6 months period, P2 may be accentuated. So all these three components, one is it has two components, A2 and P2. So there is normal splitting during inspiration and no splitting during expiration, and A2 is louder than P2 has to be fulfilled to term a second heart sound as normal. If you consider A2 or aortic component of the second heart sound, A2 may be accentuated or diminished, or it may be early or late. When it is accentuated, when the pressure on the front of the aortic valve is much higher, that means it has to work with higher force to push the blood, like in case of systemic hypertension due to any cause. Aortic regurgitation also leads to the same. A2 is diminished in intensity when there is critical aortic stenosis, so valve cusps are less mobile. So in A2 is absent when it is in aortic atresia. Second heart sound may be early or late, that is delayed. Early second heart sound is very easy to understand, because when there is some leakage of the blood during ventricular systole or the backflow, as happens in ventricular septal defect to the right ventricle or to the left atrium in case of mitral regurgitation, so left ventricle empties earlier. So valve closure occurs early. Similarly, delayed also has got the same pathogenesis. That is when the left ventricular ejection is prolonged, which may be due to two factors. Either left ventricle is dealing with extra amount of blood, as happens in patent ductus arteriosus and large left to right shunt or aortic regurgitation, that is called volume overload, or left ventricle has to forcefully eject the blood against pressure, as happens in aortic stenosis, that is called pressure overload. So there the ejection time is prolonged and valve closure is delayed. Again, when the electrical activation of the left ventricle is delayed, as happens in left bundle branch block, or left ventricle contracts slowly, leading to more ejection time and taking more time to complete the ejection. That is, in case of left ventricular failure, A2 becomes delayed. Coming to the pulmonary component, similarly, pulmonary component is accentuated in pulmonary hypertension. Pulmonary component is diminished, as you can understand now, due to critical pulmonary stenosis due to less mobile valve cusps, or P2 may be absent in case of pulmonary valve atresia. Pulmonary component may be delayed when the right ventricular electrical activation, again like A2, is delayed in right bundle branch block, or there is volume overload or pressure overload, as in case of pulmonary stenosis, atrial septal defect or pre-tricuspid shunts, or partial anomalous pulmonary venous connection PAPVC, and pulmonary regurgitation. Although P2 may occur early in tricuspid regurgitation, like mitral regurgitation, it is not recognized clinically, since tricuspid regurgitation as an isolated clinical entity is rare. And coming to the next component, and that is the splitting. Splitting during inspiration, as we know, of the second heart sound is normal, and it is normal if during expiration it becomes single. Now, if it splits during inspiration and expiration, that means we have to follow the expiratory part. If it splits during expiration, it is abnormal. If it splits during expiration, it is abnormal. There are two types of splitting in general. It is a wide variable splitting and wide fixed splitting. Wide fixed splitting, as you know, due to excess flow to the right atrium, and right atrium becomes filled with the blood both in inspiration and expiration, and there is no variability in the flow during inspiration and expiration. So atrial septal defect and its physiological component, physiological analogous, like total anomalous pulmonary venous connection, they lead to wide and fixed second heart sound as well as right bundle branch block. Whereas wide and variable splitting may be due to early A2 or late P2. Late P2 occurs in pulmonary stenosis, as you know, and early A2 occurs in VSD and MR. They lead to wide and variable splitting. From the diagram below, you can easily see wide variable and wide fixed splitting. In wide fixed splitting, it is the same throughout during inspiration and expiration, but in wide variable splitting, position of the P2 is different during inspiration and expiration. Now, delay in A2 result in close split, single or paradoxical splitting. Up to this, we are studying A2 P2. Now, it may be P2 A2 also, and everything is due to delay in A2. The amount of delay dictates whether it would be single second heart sound or it would be paradoxically splitting second heart sound. So P2A2 splitting, which is wide during expiration but narrows during inspiration, just the opposite of usual. So when the left ventricular ejection is prolonged due to pressure overload of aortic stenosis or volume overload, as in case of large shunts of PDA, or in case of aortic regurgitation, or left ventricular electrical activation is delayed, as in case of left bundle branch block. So any condition that leads to delay in A2 or delay in aortic valve closure may lead to paradoxical splitting of the second heart sound, and classically it is recognized as splitting during expiration but no splitting during inspiration. Last part of today's presentation is single second heart sound. Single second heart sound means either it is A2 or P2 or combination of A2 and P2. When P2 is inaudible, it is single A2. When A2 is inaudible, it is single P2. On combination, that is when there is moderate aortic stenosis, what happens? A2 is slightly delayed. When it falls with the P2, so it produces single second heart sound. So in combination, moderate aortic stenosis leads to single second heart sound. When A2 only, P2 is inaudible, as in case of pulmonary atresia or critical pulmonary stenosis of tetralogy of Fallot. On when P2 only and A2 is inaudible, that happens in aortic atresia and critical aortic stenosis. Decision whether it is aortic or pulmonary or a combination depends on clinical profile. History and chest X-ray can aid in distinguishing between the two conditions, and it is difficult to diagnose clinically. This presentation may be a slightly boring one for you, but for your clinical acumen, you need to understand these things, and in your bedside clinics, these things are absolutely necessary. So in the next class, we'll discuss about tetralogy of Fallot, which is the classical cyanotic heart disease you need for your academics. Thank you.